Good afternoon, Cody and Rebecca. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So a couple of months ago, I invited you to read with me C.S. Lewis's biography, which is called Surprised by Joy. So I want to ask you, how did you like it?
To be honest, it was kind of overwhelming, Because I do have a lot of readings for classes, and you usually don't read books in your free time, right? These days, I don't know, Gen Z stuff maybe, but you usually just go on YouTube or social medias, and book is not your priority. So taking that time to read a book, and the first part of the book maybe kind of boring because it's all about his life and what he's been through, and oh, so what's the message of this? Why do we have to learn this? I think I was constantly asking the question. Yeah.
Thank you. How about you, Cody?
So unlike Rebecca, I don't go to school. I don't have a lot of readings, but it was still difficult to read.
Yes.
I am usually not a book reader. Obviously books are the last thing that I go to. Last resort, is usually the entertainment. It's always the fun stuff. And then reading is probably the last thing. So I was introduced to this opportunity to read this book together. It seemed like a good idea. It seemed like a fun idea. And once I started reading, it was another reminder of how much reading sucks.
Thank you for your honesty.
Of course.
Well, I want us to talk about reading, why reading can be fun, So I totally agree with you, by the way. I think it has to do with our generation, with smartphones and internet constantly around us. It's so easy to just go to YouTube or something like that. And it's hard to pick up a book and, it just seems like a black and white thing. So I totally sympathize with you. I think it's the same for adults as well. But still, I think even though we're always reading, obviously you're still reading, right? When you're looking at phones or something like that. You're reading something.
Yeah.
Or TV or movie or something. Well, anyway, if there's a 자막 or something like that, you're listening and you're reading. But why should we read? I want us to just kind of think about this phenomenon of reading. Reading has existed for several thousand years, and writing was invented, and people wrote and people read. But we're quickly kind of losing certain types of writings, and so I want us to have an honest discussion about why do we like to read, or why do we not like to read?
I read a lot of articles about this, or how a lot of adults talk about this, but I feel for our generation, our attention span is just growing shorter, because we are so used to short text and tweets that are 280 letters, I think, and we're so used to those short, precise, quick messages. So we are not really used to these long text where you have to really understand the entire context and constantly remember what's going on.
Right. Thank you. I think you hit the button of where the heart of the problem is. I think you said it's difficult to retain in memory. We have shorter attention spans. Right? Do you agree with that?
Definitely.
Okay. So you kind of inadvertently, unintentionally, you kind of put a pulse on where the problem is. Our attention span has gotten shorter. It's not that the problem is with the book, its problem is with us, right? We forget easily. We don't want to remember things. So then what kind of things do we like to read or pay attention to?
Well, like you said before too, we're always reading, even though we're on social media or we're on the internet, we're always reading regardless. But I think it's the way it's given to us. So when we're on social media, like Rebecca was saying, everything is simplified in a way where it's easier to understand, easier to comprehend, which is why in the morning or midday or at night when I'm reading this book, it stimulates your brain in a different way. Whereas when you're watching entertainment, you're reading, or when you were saying like 자막 and subtitles when you're reading, but there's always an image or an entertainment behind what you're reading. So I feel like it's easier to comprehend when it's in an entertainment sense. Whereas when it's just a book with print and paper, it's a little bit harder to comprehend. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, you used all the good words. Easier to understand or easier to comprehend, entertaining. So those are some of the differences. So in a sense, that's good. I mean, visual aids, the video graphics, whatever, they are more entertaining and they're easier to understand. Definitely. So it's not all bad that all this video forms of watching or looking at things. But what about the downside of it? What about you both agreed that we're reading less just on words. What effect does that have on us? What are we losing?
I think we're definitely consuming media or any information without really thinking or processing through it. Like we're just like literally absorbing it, but we're not really thinking about it, and we're not really thinking if it's valid or like if it's important for us, and like we really lost that like ability to read the message behind the text and message behind the content almost. That's
amazing, Rebecca. I think you just hit all of the right spots. We don't really think is the word you used. I think that's it. I mean, it's hard for us to think. We don't know how to think well. And you said like we can't check behind what's going on, the assumptions or foundations behind what's being told to us. Because we're not thinking. So there's danger involved in that. Do you agree, Cody?
Yes. I also feel like, I mean, just, we're not going to get too deep into the book, but even like where he went from one event to the other event, it's like he's like moving along in his life so much. And sometimes, or like what we were talking about, how we don't like to think, we lose track of that. Like his life, I'm like, dang, it's got too many things going on. you just forget what's going on. I mean, just to simply like what you guys were saying, I really think we just, I don't know if we're allowed to say this, but we just become dumber. I think we're all becoming dumb. But if we all, like if we're all becoming dumb together, I think that's kind of if this whole generation, right, this new generation is all consuming the internet. I feel like because we're on the same wave, like we don't feel out of it, like out of the loop.
But
like
that makes me feel, think like the herd mentality, what they call, have you heard of a buffalo, how they all die? So one lead buffalo and there's a woo and he's going toward the cliff. And then you get the rest, right? All the buffalo falls off the cliff. Does that kind of feel like us?
So we're the buffaloes.
Definitely. No, definitely. I feel like that is what this generation is. Like with that follow mentality, which is why I think a lot of us are kind of losing the ability to think.
Okay, I think you're totally on board with us.
No, I am. I'm completely on board with you guys. Yeah.
You understand, that it is fun. It is easier to understand all these video forms, but at the same time, they could be dangerous. We could all
the downside to
die together, right?
And there's simply no improvement or growth. Like the goal of the society is to always grow in some kind of format. But if we just stop thinking and stop like seeking for that development, like there will be no growth. And yeah, like end of growth means death, and that just means that our society and civilization is really at the risk almost.
Yes, so let's talk a little bit more about the danger here, the risk of the herd mentality, not being able to think clearly. Then what can happen if somebody decides, they're going to control us to think in a certain way? do you agree that this is kind of happening now, like what they call big tech, you know, the whole thing with big tech, Facebook or whatever, you know, they control, they manipulate, I forget what you call it. They have a way of putting certain things in front of you that you like, right? And it's a way of manipulating how we think. They already know what we're going to eat for breakfast tomorrow morning, and they're going to put that breakfast in front of us. And just we watch what we like to watch, right? Whether we like it or not, right? And the big tech knows that. So they could utilize our desires and take it in a direction where they want us to take it, right? I mean, you know about this, what do you call this?
It's like the algorithm.
Yes, the algorithm. Thank you. That's what they call it. So do you agree that there is a danger, a low level of thinking, and somebody can have a control of the media, and we could start thinking the way they want us to think? Do you agree with?
Yes.
Right. So we need to revive the art of reading. Why? Because I think we all agree already that it's so that we can think clearly, right? So that we can discern what is right or wrong, and so that we don't have to follow just whatever is being fed to us visually or written form. But we could differ in opinion. We could say no when we have to say no. Do you agree?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So I think that's why we need to read, you know, in order to grow our brain and grow our thinking skills, because it's hard, and always whenever we have to train our brains to think, it's a hard business. I think that's fundamentally what's at stake here. The need to read is so that we could grow in our discernment, as well as, of course, to broaden our understanding of the world.
But like, my question is, I get that it's so important and so crucial, but how do you make it fun?
Thank
Like,
you. Okay, $1 million question. Okay.
Yeah.
How to make it fun? Okay. I would recommend that for this generation that you use a hybrid method. So there's always a visual form of a book or something like that. So you do watch a little bit of the video or movie or whatever. Now there's a cartoon version of everything. All the books, you know, like cartoon version of Surprised by Joy. Oh, I think I just gave it away. You know.
Searching up on Amazon right now.
But you get to cheat a little bit, in other words. But of course, we know the danger of cliff notes and so forth. You want to read the original. But if you, in order to stoke interest, because ultimately the goal is comprehension. I need to be able to understand. So we need a little bit of crutch. I admit, you know, a little bit of chi-chi, and that's okay. Of course, under good control. Yes, I think there are many ways we can make it fun. I think the most important thing is that what we're doing right now, that we talk about it. You know, we talk about why it's whatever we're reading is relevant, first of all, right? Why it matters to us now. Obviously, we don't read in order to, I hope not, just to make us smart, look smart, or so we can make our dinner conversation more lively. I mean, that's helpful too, but it needs to help us in some practical ways, right? There has to be a practical purpose behind reading. I agree. So it's not so that I make myself look better, or a resume or something like that. Yeah, there are a ton of ideas, but I mean, we could talk about that later.
Well, with kind of what you said, with what we talked about before too, is you were saying the point of reading, or not the main point, but a reason behind reading is you need to comprehend what you're reading. And if having a crutch, or like you were saying, there's a cartoon on Surprised by Joy, wouldn't that kind of go back to the point of us not being able to think? Like, let's say we go home and find the cartoon version of Surprised by Joy, and then we have a discussion about it based on the cartoon, wouldn't that completely back what we were saying about why we're unable to think?
True. So in the school that I run, you know, we're not allowed to, students are not allowed to use Cliff Notes or cartoon versions of anything. Yeah, we're hardcore, you know. And of course, they might cheat, you know, at home, you know, even though they're not supposed to. So you're right, there's always a danger of using these crutches. But it's better than nothing is what I'm saying. Like, how to get someone to read, right? That's the goal. And if you need the crutches, why not? Of course, you have to have somebody to keep you accountable to make sure you're not always using the crutches. But you have to enjoy. It's the joy. There has to be enjoyment factor, I think. Like, you read because you like reading, right? And so what's the point of hating a reading, right? Because you just got another point on your tally sheet. It's like, I hate reading. This just confirms I hate reading. Then you won't read the next time. So somehow the goal is to get you to enjoy that piece of literature. And that then that brings up the subject of what kind of book. You know, it's important that you start reading the kind of book that you really enjoy, because there's so many different kinds of reading, right? So for example, at our school, for middle school students who by nature don't like reading, right? We give them mysteries like Agatha Christie or, you know, Hercule Poirot or something like that, a mystery novel or adventures novel, something that they really like reading, fall in love with reading. And then they think that they love to read. They're natural readers, which they're not. But anyway, you get the point. You have to love reading.
That's so interesting because, like, I'm taking a theater, like, critical studies class in my school right now. And we read one play a week. And I feel like I've became, like, a master of pretending like I know things and just saying it. So I'm just, like, I'm really good at pretending like I've read it when I really didn't read it. Okay. I've done it several times.
The art of pretending. Okay. Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how you're bringing up how we have to like enjoy what we are reading right now. And I think it's so hard for students because it feels like requirement, and especially for harder texts like, you know, like classics. It's really hard for us to find interest in them first, right? So why do we have to learn classics, and how do we get interested in reading classics?
Excellent question. So why read the classics? I would say first and foremost, I think of three reasons. One is the reason of language. I was recently watching a video clip of this guy named Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you heard of him. Famous Canadian psychologist. He's a non-Christian, but he's about to become a Christian. Very fascinating guy, because a lot of his friends are Christians, but he refused to be a Christian because he just thinks a lot of hypocrisy everywhere in Christianity, which is true. You know, I totally like, okay, that's why I listened to this guy. But he said he visited the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., and I recently visited that place too. And I'm like, okay, I'm paying attention. And he said he was totally transformed by a visit to that museum. It gives you a history of the Bible. But the conclusion he made was very astounding, which he says he realized that without the Bible, that we would not be able to speak meaningfully in any language, because when you know the history of the Bible was literally one of the first books that was ever written in any language, right? It goes way back. And all the other languages kind of sprung up around the Bible, and they would refer back to the language used in the Bible. So if you don't know the Bible, then you can't speak meaningfully about anything. That's a radical statement. Does that make sense to you? You have to kind of think about that. Well, that's an argument from the Bible language. All that's to say is if language is built up over centuries and millennia, right? So if you don't read things in the back, which is classics, right? You read ancient stuff, then whatever you talk about, the conversation you have with each other now, is necessarily a little bit shallower than a person who is well-read, classics. They're interacting with the wisdom and the meaningfulness of the past, present, and maybe the future. So it's a deeper conversation. Does that make sense? So I would say that's why we read classics. It's the first reason is it just makes your language richer. There's more meaningful conversations. And secondly, I would say it's because you just become wiser. You understand other cultures, past and present, better, right? It's a window into other people's minds, other people's way of thinking, which can be very different than the way we're thinking, right? You might say, well, why can't we do that with videos? I'm just thinking of your question, right? which they seem to be doing a fine job of, right? A lot of different adaptations, and yes, but I would say not to the depth of that literatures can do. Somebody recently just asked me, Dr. Kim, why do we have to read poetry in our school? So I'm like, okay. I thought it was obvious at our school, but evidently not. Somebody asked me, and so I provided them with some resources of why poetry is so important. Poetry is like different than prose because it uses figures of speech, right? It helps us understand things behind the reality, right? The first thing that was ever written in the Bible is when Adam says to his wife, Madam, I'm Adam. No, I'm just kidding. That's kind of palindrome, that if you hold it up, take it up, reverse it, it's the same thing. Madam, I'm Adam, backwards and so forth. No, he said, you're the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. That's a piece of poetry. So the first thing that was even uttered by a human being, recorded in the Bible, is a piece of poetry. He could have said, oh, you're my wife and you're great and all of that, but that's not as powerful as saying you're bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Pure piece of poetry. Not literally, she's not my bone, but she came from my bone. But you get it? It's powerful. It conveys a deeper level of his love for her. And that's what literature does. It especially classics. It widens your understanding, appreciation. It conveys a deeper understanding of other people.
So for this discussion specifically, how come we chose C.S. Lewis to discuss his book?
Yes. When I was asked to choose a classics, this is kind of like classics. It's recently written, right? I think around 1950s or whatever. C.S. Lewis biography, Surprised by Joy, because I thought it would be fun, right? The fun factor, interesting. C.S. Lewis is really a mysterious figure. He's he's easily considered the most influential Christian in the 20th century, and even now. I think his popularity is gaining even now. He's a very, very influential, and so because he is so influential, I think you would find him interesting and say, why is he so interesting? Well, he's so interesting because he makes Christianity very convincing, right? In a day and age where that's hard to do, because a lot of people look down on Christianity, and even a lot of Christians, like young people like you, they just fall away from faith. They stop going to church after college, like 80 to 90%. So, but a lot of even atheists are coming back to the faith, Christian faith, because through C.S. Lewis. I remember watching a YouTube video, this lady, she's a total atheist, went to Harvard, and she somehow, long story, but started to read C.S. Lewis, and she accepted Christ as her Lord just by reading C.S. Lewis. Wow. C.S. Lewis is also, because he's a writer, he's not a pastor or a theologian, and he's the author of the Narnia series, and he really can tell a story well. Yeah. So I think you would find a lot of struggles that you have in his life. And I think I know he intentionally wrote his book wanting to be a beacon to many people like us, this generation who are lost in darkness. So he's very blunt and honest about his struggles. And I'm slightly surprised that you said you were bored by the beginning part, but I thought that was the more interesting part.
Honestly, like when he was starting to throw those like names of like philosophers and like all those like scholars, I was like, whoa.
Yes, the way he wrote it, I grant it is not easy read. You have to read it several times. But the story he tells is very, very interesting, right?
Yeah, I think it was interesting for me because, like, I mean, I read Bible and I do those, and I regularly attend church. And I had a lot of, like, you know, talks with, like, pastors, and I thought I had enough opportunities to really learn about Christianity and to really think about Christianity. But like sometimes I didn't initially understand why we have to read a book on like theology or like Christianity other than like Bible. Like I didn't understand how it would make us grow in faith almost. You know?
Excellent question, because another book that I wanted us to read together by C.S. Lewis addresses that very problem. It's called The Abolition of Man. And the book Abolition of Man is about the problem of modern education, which is basically, he analyzes the problem this way. He says, the modern education's problem is that it separates the head from the heart, right? So his argument is that the modern educational system wants to leave out the heart. Why? Because they say, the heart, which deals with our faith and our emotions and our subjectiveness, you know, there's like, all of that is a distraction to clear thinking. So we must just separate the whole education and make sure we focus on like very simple stuff that our head can handle. Which seems like, I see what their point is, but the result, he says, is catastrophic. It abolishes the man. It destroys the whole person. Because you assume that education is about the head, when really the education should be about the whole person, the head and the heart and the hand. Do you agree with his basic premise there in that book? So it's kind of like what you just said is the Bible, like in order to know God, is it good enough that we go to church and read the Bible and pray? What do you think?
I thought so.
Right. That's the assumption we all bought into when we go to school, public school, right? You go to church to get right with God, and you go to public school to prepare for a career, right? But just think very common sense, logically. Is that what God wants? Like, you can have all 6 days all by yourself, just get a bunch of skills and go and do whatever you want and just come and worship me and repent every time you come back because you always sin in there and I'll forgive you. You go back and sin more and you come back. As far as I know, that's not what the Bible tells me. It says, know God through everything, through culture, through literature, through your hobbies, and through entertainment, you know, sports, whatever it is. And to honor me, to glorify me. To enjoy God and to glorify God in everything that we do, all 7 days. So if you think about that and you apply that to like what we do in education, oh my goodness, we're in serious trouble. We're committing like sin without knowing it, like through the education that we do, through the pursuit, like I'm studying hard in order to make a good career without thinking about honoring God or enjoying God. To God, that is a deep, deep offense. He's angry at us. And we don't even know that. Everybody else is doing it. Like everybody else is being dumbed down and everybody's, we're falling off the cliff. God is angry that his own children are about to fall off the cliff. And he wants us to come back and enjoy him through everything. And you know, that's the story of C.S. Lewis. It's his journey of how he was converted. and how he found the joy. That's why it's called Surprised by Joy.
In the beginning, we were talking about the downsides or the bad that we see in not reading books. But if I'm honest with you, I don't like I have my phone. If I want any information on anything, I can go on Google.
Right.
I could look everything up.
Right.
What do you think? Because I mean, aside from thinking, I feel like now, because of our resources, we don't need to think. Like I just said, if I want to know something, I can ask Google, and Google will tell me everything. So when you say we are losing the ability to think, but we are in a generation where we don't necessarily need to think because of our resources. What do you think is the benefit of reading in this generation where we have so many resources?
Thank you for an honest question. So I'm going to give you an honest answer. So you're assuming that we don't need to think. That's an assumption. It's a big assumption. Okay. But let's think more in detail. Like you're trying to find a piece of information. Okay. What minimum thinking is necessary in order to make the decision about what piece of information you're going to look up, right? You have to make there is a necessary decision you have to make in order to access information, okay? And it's not merely information. That's a mistaken assumption. It's not like, oh, I need to know piece of A information rather than a B information. It's not that simple. Because life is much more than whether I'm going to get a banana rather than an apple. It's an ethical question that inevitably you have to deal with, okay? Because you have to choose, if I take A rather than a B, and it has to do with an ethical choice, right? Right or wrong, then you're kind of stuck. Like, how do I determine which path to take, right? Then you're going to search in your brain and you're going to like, Cody, look up information in my brain because I need something by which I can decide A or B. And you know, your brain's going to come back and tell you this. I'm sorry, it's empty. There's nothing to decide whether it's A or B. You need to go and read more book and become more wise and have a better standard by which you can make good choices in life. Does that help?
Yes. I hear what you're saying.
This is a huge problem because God created us so that we can be like him. That's a tall order. It's not good enough. Okay, remember this. It's not good enough to just love him and worship and enjoy him. He expects us to become like him. Okay, how do we become like him? We have to think like him. Basically, his goal is to, through reading, Bible is reading. Now, there's an audio version these days, so you can say, well, that's listening. Fine, we'll count that. You know, just get God's word into your heart and your mind and let it become you. We have a saying that I teach to people all the time. You become what you read. Right? You become basically you have to ultimately know what to fill your minds and heart with. Because that's how you become. But on the other hand, you say you don't have to think. Then what you're doing is you just made the biggest decision in your life to let the powers that be, the entertainers, to make you what they want you to be. You just chosen a major pathway in life. I'm a total believer in being entertained. We are. That's part of how you enjoy God. We need to be entertained, but entertained in a way where you are, wow, like you discover how beautiful God is, how lovely it is. I love watching like movies and so forth. But ultimately, like, is it in the direction of enjoying God more and honoring God and becoming more like God?
I really agree because, like, as someone who wants to be in the entertainment industry, like, I just see how entertainment industry is so focused on, like, it's like very profit oriented. So it's better for them if we don't think. So I think it is really meaningful to really hear how, as Christians, as the followers of Christ, we constantly need to remind ourselves that God gave us this beautiful free will for us to choose, and we can't let that be taken away by, those like big major companies.
Thank you. I think, again, you nailed it on the head. It's the money, pursuit of money that drives everybody. And we need to somehow find a bigger power than money. Because once we let money decide what we're going to read, who we're going to hang out with, what job we're going to get, then we're going to die. Not just die, we're going to shrivel up. Our soul is going to dry up. And we think we're having fun, but it just becomes one of pretense. We're pretending like we're enjoying our life, but we're really not.
Yeah, that really relates to the reading as well.
Exactly. It's all about rediscovery of joy. That's why I chose this book. So, what do you think? Like, let's get together a few more times. Let's say 3 times, break up the book into, I don't want us to rush into the content. There's so much in there. I want us to like chew on it, for like 3 sessions. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
That's a great idea.
Thank you. Yay, I won you.
Sorry. Sounds like a great idea.
Thank you. Yeah.
Show more enthusiasm.